Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. Number 3. Black Abductor by Harrison James. It was just past 9 p.m. on Monday, February 4th, 1974. Patricia Hearst, the 19-year-old granddaughter of newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst, was studying for a college history exam when there was a knock on her apartment door. Patty cracked the door open to see a woman named Angela who said she'd been in a car accident and needed to use the phone. When Patty opened the door to let her inside, two men appeared behind her and forced their way in. They pistol-whipped Patty's fiancé, Stephen, and fired guns into the ceiling to stop him from resisting. Then the trio took hold of the young woman, dragged her out the door, shoved her into the trunk of a car, and drove off together into history. The infamous kidnapping of Patty Hearst was not the first abduction of a member of a prominent family. Frank Sinatra's son, Frank Jr., was also famously kidnapped a decade before Patty. But Patty Hearst's abduction might be the most shocking. Then again, book lovers, with a penchant for softcore porn in the early 70s, might have seen it coming. Because of the similarities between it and the plot of a 1972 schlock erotica novel called Black Abductor were incredible. Here are just some of the many plot details which appear in both the book and in the real-life case. In the novel, the woman who is abducted is the daughter of a powerful, wealthy, and ultra-conservative California senator. In real life, Patty was the daughter of Randy Hearst, a billionaire who still ran his late father's conservative newspaper empire. In the novel, the woman is taken from the campus of a college, which is only a few miles away from her family's secluded mansion in a town called Midwood. In real life, Patty's abduction from her college apartment occurred not far from the family's mansion in a place called Hillsborough. In the novel, the abductors badly beat up the girl's boyfriend, just as their real-life counterparts did to Patty's fiancé, Stephen. In both the novel and in real life, the kidnapping was led by an African-American male who carried out the abduction with three others, including a bisexual woman named Angela. In both cases, the abductors sent ransom instructions through the mail, and both demanded the release of an imprisoned militant in return for the girl's safety. And in both stories, the kidnappers are part of an anti-fascist group bent on violent means to achieve its political goals. The parallels continue after the abduction as well. In real life, Patricia Hearst famously turned from abductee to participant, joining the revolutionaries who took her, and going along with several other criminal activities to further their cause. The same thing happens in Black Abductor, with the woman in the novel secretly vowing to work for the revolution even after she is freed. Oh, and the name of the woman who's kidnapped in the book is Patricia. That last little plot detail was enough to spark some interest over at the FBI, who opened a file on the similarities between the book and the case. G-Men obtained a copy of the rare book and set about contacting the publisher and the author, but they couldn't track down either one. Regency Press, it seems, was a bit of a fly-by-night operation, had no offices and operated solely out of a post office box, which apparently had been abandoned. The author, Harrison James, was also hard to find. No record of a writer by that name could be found anywhere, leading investigators to believe it was a pseudonym. The FBI eventually questioned a doctor of psychology named James Rusk as possibly being the elusive Harrison James, but they crossed him off the list after learning he was a simple, middle-aged family man living in California. Certainly, given the book's graphic depictions of freaky sex, no one was eager to come forward to take credit for the book. Of course, when weird things happen in a vacuum, the conspiracy theorists line up to fill the void. Speculation arose that Regency was a shell publisher of Hearst newspapers, and that Patty's father commissioned the book as a kind of blueprint for the real thing. perhaps hoping her kidnapping might feed the public's outcry for more law and order against those infamous 1960s radicals. Other suspicious minds thought that the book was written by Patty Hearst herself and that she engineered the entire thing as a publicity stunt. Still others believed that the book was written by members of the Sudanese Liberation Army in order to inspire its members to perhaps pull off the real thing. But there were never really any answers either way. In 1975, Grove Press claimed they bought the rights from the now defunct Regency Press, and they republished Black Abductor as Abductor, fiction before fact. Included with the new edition was a story behind the story account of the similarities between the Patty Hearst kidnapping and the one in the book. The book then got made into a movie called Abduction, directed by Joseph Zito, who later directed Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, and Missing in Action. But when it came time for the film's production company to buy valuable ads in the major newspapers, they curiously found out that they had been turned away by the dozens of newspapers still owned by the family of William Randolph Hearst. Number 2, Incendiary by Chris Cleave. As with the film Abduction, movies based on shocking real-life events are Hollywood old hat. So when the British film Incendiary came out amidst poor reviews, it barely made a blip in the minds of the movie-going public. It is about the aftermath of a terrorist attack carried out in the heart of London, which might explain why filmgoers stayed away in droves. Released in 2008, it was only a couple of years removed from the horrific terrorist attack on London on July 7, 2005, or 7/7 as has come to be known. That attack killed 54 people and injured nearly 1,000 others. That was just the physical toll. The mental wounds from that attack are incalculable. So perhaps, for some, going to see a London-set movie about terrorism was still too soon. But regardless of the movie's reception, bookworms may have recognized its title, Incendiary, and realized the film was based on a book of the same name. Written by Chris Cleave, Incendiary was the author's much-touted debut novel. It has to do with the horrific aftermath of the terror bombing of football team Arsenal's home field in London's North End. Cleave said he drew inspiration from the plot from the 2004 train bombings in Madrid, Spain. As Cleave says on his website, I needed to write something to remind myself of the simple human cost of all these attacks. Cleave turned in his draft to his publisher, and they liked what they read, especially its relevance to current events. Immediately, plans were made for a big advertising push for the book. Cleave was booked on countless talk shows. Bookstore window displays were set up. Magazine ads were taken out, and posters were put up around town. Review copies were then sent to major media outlets, many of which proclaimed the book a triumph. Newsweek called it a, quote, haunting work of art, unquote. And this was before the novel was even published. Things were looking up for Cleave, who was only 32 at the time. On the eve of the book's release day, Cleave's publisher invited the author and his friends to a launch party. Cleave writes that he stayed up late and enjoyed celebrating his coming success. But the party was on the night of July 6, 2005. When he woke up the next day, the day of his book's release, all hell had broken loose in London. All while those ad posters for his book, featuring his smoking London skyline and the question, what if, were still papered to the walls of the tube stations. Quickly, the bookstore displays were removed from store windows, interviews were cancelled, posters were taken down. Some media outlets, not knowing that the book was produced before the bombings, called Cleave and his publisher insulting and insensitive. Other, more sensational outlets wondered, conspiratorially, how Cleave could have been so exactly prophetic. Well, it turns out he wasn't alone in his prophecy. 4 months before the 7/7 bombings in February 2005, author Stephen Leather released his book, Soft Target. It's a breezy beach read, also about a terrorist attack in London. Except in that book, the attack is planned by 4 British-born radical Muslims, just as the 7/7 attack had been in real life. In the book, the attackers also detonated 3 bombs in the subway system and 1 more above ground. Again, this is what happened in real life. It was uncanny, really, Leather told the Times of London in 2008. I had just been speaking to a lot of anti-terror experts, then I'm watching TV on 7/7, and there are the same people I've been talking to. One side plot of the story sees the hero having to shoot a potential suicide bomber, a story that eerily echoes the shooting of John Charles de Manassas, said to be a conspirator in the attempted bombing of the London tube stations on July 21, 2005. Still, Leather insists that his work and the works of authors like Chris Cleave bear no responsibility for the true events they seem to predict, and he doubts very highly that terrorists are searching bookstore shelves for inspirational ideas. Terrorists don't get their ideas from fiction, Leather said. In any case, I always leave out details, so it's not a blueprint for an attack. Number 1. The Open Square by Ford Clark. Incendiary would go on to win a number of awards and perform well financially, ensuring a long and prosperous career for its author, Chris Cleave. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for author Ford Clark. In the late 1950s, the 29-year-old Clark was trying to get his writing career off the ground. He battered away on his second-hand typewriter, crumpling page after page and tossing them aside. But then, in 1962, success. Clark's first novel, The Open Square, was picked up by Gold Medal Books, the company that made its bones on 2-bit Pulp Fiction paperbacks with lavishly illustrated covers. We say 2-bit because they literally cost 50 cents, 2 quarters, and not necessarily because they were bad. But they could usually be found in those spinning carousels at the airport newsstand. When the Beatles sang about a paperback writer, they were singing about writers like Clark. And after his book's publication, he relished in the few promising reviews it got. The broken record called The Open Square smashed Impact's suspense. It was just enough to keep him pounding away on his Smith Corona. But Ford's follow-up gold medal novel, The Wicked Walk on Every Side, hit the shelves in 1965 to the sound of silence. No one noticed, and Ford pondered an uncertain future mired in obscurity. Until, 1 year later, 4 years after the publication of The Open Square. On August 1, 1966, Charles Whitman climbed up to the clock tower at the University of Texas and used a high-power rifle to shoot students milling around below on the campus square. By the time he was shot dead by authorities 80 minutes later, Whitman had killed 13 people. Back in Iowa, Ford Clark was working at his typewriter, trying to come up with a third novel when his fiancée called him. She told him to turn on the news, because people at the University of Texas were acting out the events of his novel. Flipping on the TV, Clark was at first bemused. I completely misunderstood her, Clark told reporter Glenn Castleberry later. I thought they were making a play of the book. But it didn't take long for him to understand the cold, horrible truth. Charles Whitman's rampage was a carbon copy of the one he'd written about in The Open Square 4 years before. Oh God, he said aloud, don't let this be due to my book. From there, the phone calls began. Reporters, detectives, cranks. When told the similarities between the two plots, the cops scrambled to find a copy of the long out-of-print book. Austin detectives called Clark to question him as to his potential involvement in the rampage. To be fair, it was hard to blame them. The parallels between the story and the Tower tragedy were spooky, to say the very least. In the book, a mentally ill student named Ted Weeks, armed with a telescopic rifle and a .357 Magnum, climbs up to a tower on the University of Iowa campus and fires at the people below. Whitman was also a student at the school, U of T, where he said about his evil, and had the exact same weapons. Among Weeks' supply in the tower were water, canned food, fuel, a roll of toilet paper, and 500 rounds of ammunition. All the exact same supplies women had with him in Texas, right down to the TP. In the book, Weeks has a suitcase for his supplies. In real life, women had used an army footlocker. Women pop Strexidine pills to stay alert during his deed, while Weeks has to settle for caffeine pills. Women fires from cover atop of the tower through the wall's ventilation slots. Weeks does the same. Both gunmen were eventually taken out by a group of 3 men. In the book, as the posse climbs to the tower to stop him, Weeks kills police officer Ross before finally being felled by gunshots to the neck and the chest from an off-duty police officer. On August 1st, Charles Whitman killed police officer Billy Speed before being taken down by off-duty officer Ray Martinez, also with shots to the neck and chest. The striking similarities in not only how things went down that day, but also in Whitman and Weeks' backstories and strained family relationships led some to speculate Whitman had actually read Ford's book before carrying out his rampage. Yet, despite exhaustive searches of Whitman's properties and repeated questioning of those who knew him, detectives found no evidence that he had even heard of the open square, let alone read it. But for author Ford Clark, the phone calls kept coming. One anonymous caller told him if he ever came to Austin, Texas, he'd wind up with a bullet in his head. Another woman sobbed into the phone that the shooting was all his fault. Clark eventually had his phone disconnected and fell into a deep depression. He died of cancer in 1980 at the age of 48. But back in 1966, after the Tower tragedy, Clark threw away the manuscript for his in-progress 3rd novel. He took a low-paying job as a TV reporter and gave up his lifelong dream of being a paperback writer. Never quite understanding why or how real life had so closely imitated his art. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.